Welcome back, everybody. Preseason testing for Formula One is officially over as they wrapped up week 2 in Bahrain here this week. And now the only thing remaining is the slow and steady wait for Australia in just a few short weeks. We have a lot of questions. We saw a lot of stuff here in the second week. Ferrari might be back. Aston might be in hell. And yeah, we're here to talk about everything we saw here in week 2 and kind of go over the highlight points I think we could take away from week 2 and start taking a look at the questions that all but remain for Australia in round 1. Well, let's go ahead. Let's jump straight on into this thing and talk about our week high level notes. Let's go ahead and get things started with our big takeaway moments from this second week in Bahrain. And I think we have to start with Ferrari because I think it actually might be the biggest talking point from this second week, especially the final day when we had Charles Leclerc go 8/10 faster than Oscar Piastri in the McLaren here on the final day. And it was quite a week for Ferrari, I think. They obviously, it's still very much up in the air what this performance truly means for them, but at the same time, I think it has a lot of Ferrari fans and a lot of people starting to take notice. Yes, it's only testing. Yes, you can only take so much away from it, but at the same time, they turned a lot of heads, a lot of eyes, which has sort of been looking over Ferrari over the off-season and the beginning part of testing, is starting to finally take notice that they might actually have a semi-competitive car and a semi-competitive outfit for this season. So it is a very intriguing thing, to say the least. I think the thing that tells us the most about where Ferrari is at is Charles Leclerc smiling. There was a big talking point over these 2 weeks in testing where Charles Leclerc famously did not end off the last era of regulations on a good note with Ferrari. There was a lot of talk about him being really unhappy with the performance, with the way the team has been going. And so the fact that he's now coming into 2026, obviously in a much better mood, obviously enjoying the car and what it's been able to provide, I think says a lot about the confidence that they have. Obviously, once again, big caveat, we don't really know how they truly stack up, and we won't know until we get to Australia. But at the same time, topping the times in a week of testing, while not super representative, is definitely still a really good sign. And Ferrari fans have to be on cloud 9 for sure. In the exact opposite camp, though, we have Aston Martin, which are basically, I think, in the furthest depths of the deep that I think one could imagine. They once again were plagued by a lot of issues over the course of the 3 days. They had a lot of trouble with running, a lot of trouble with reliability. They obviously have completely misjudged some characteristic of this car, and it just is not going well for them so far. It is honestly one of the more baffling things that I think could have happened over this 2 weeks to really leave me feeling this poorly about them. But at the same time, when you have the performance that they put out there this week and over these 2 weeks, I think there's nothing more you can be than extremely concerned about what's going to happen for them this season. So it will be very interesting to see if they can turn it around. But as of right now, I think they seem comfortably 11th in the constructors, and it's going to take a lot, I think, for the sentiment for the team to sort of move towards more positive light, because they need it, and they need it bad. So we covered the top, we covered the bottom. Let's go ahead and talk about the middles. The sort of the fight for best of the rest, I think, actually could be once again a very exciting prospect for this season. Last year, I think Williams jumped on that pretty early and often, and were able to sort of just coast the rest of this 2025 season with that best of the rest title. But as we head now into a new era of regulations, it seems like we have a 2 or 3 team fight to see who is truly going to grab that basically 5th position in the constructors this season. We have, I think, 3 teams that are the biggest contenders for that. We have Haas, my team, I pray. We have Alpine, and we have VCAR. Obviously, the 3 of these cars have sort of traded off and been similar in terms of pace and performance. And so I think it might come down to a reliability factor, or even just, the drivers themselves that will make the difference here. But you saw Haas in the Ferrari-powered car over the course of both the Barcelona shakedown and these 2 weeks of testing show up with a very reliable setup, and it seems like they really have a good grasp of the baseline for their car going into the season, which is a huge boon for them, especially if they can now continue to develop off of this understanding of the baseline. And so that is going to bode very well for them. Alpine, on the other hand, gets the benefit of the Mercedes engine. We've seen them take a big step up in performance as compared to last year. Obviously, kind of hard to get much worse than last year, but at the same time, they have showed a lot of pace, including the final day of testing, where we saw Ollie Behrman and Pierre Gasly sort of go back and forth, trading faster laps between the two. So I think they have shown relatively similar pace, and I think that is going to be a very interesting one to follow as well. And then VCarb, sort of there. I think if I was going to rank them, I think it would be like Alpine and Haas, 1A and 1B, and then VCarb sort of like a 1D, whereas like they feel just like a little half step below. This one might come down to the performance of Arvid Lindblad and Liam Lawson more so than the car itself. Obviously, time will tell. All of this is made up. We're making this all up along the way. But I think that fight for the best of the rest spot could be one of the more fun things to follow this season. Looking elsewhere besides the teams individually, I think we saw some improvements from the entire grid itself. We saw multiple of these practice race starts, these race start simulations that they would do towards the end of these sessions, where all the drivers would then get to line up and do effectively what they would imagine the race start sequence to be. That involved multiple formation laps and then a brief pause to let these teams spin up their turbos and then obviously get away. It did make obviously great improvements over the first week. Again, hard to get much worse. All cars consistently were able to get away. The performance of those pullaways varied widely. The Ferrari powered cars seemed to benefit the most, but I think Mercedes definitely started to figure it out by the time the third day came along. So I think Ferrari on race starts, at least as of right now, are the team to beat. We'll see if that stays the same. The teams have a couple of weeks to analyze the data and try and figure something out, but for now, Ferrari were definitely the most compliant when it came to getting off the line in a hurry. So I think they still definitely have the benefit there, but I think the race starts coming down from these things where they're like, oh, we'll need to have a 10-second delay by the time all the cars are set to let these teams spin up the turbos and do all this stuff. I think that's a bit overblown. I think we've seen a 5-second delay thrown around this week, so we'll see where it ends up. But for now, it seemed like race starts were much less of an issue than it was in week 1. And since we are now done with the 2 weeks of testing, if we take a sort of a step back and sort of take a look at our takeaways from the 2 weeks as a whole, I think this is going to be a bit of a jarring season in terms of field spread. Obviously, at the end of 2025, the end of a regulation era, all the teams have sort of figured out the right way to do things and tuned their packages to the best of their ability. And so we actually saw some of the tightest field spread we'd seen in a long time in the sport. I think that could be taking a big 180 going into the season, not only in preseason testing, which again, testing times you can only take so much away from, but it truly does look like the field spread over not only a single lap, but probably a race distance will probably be a lot larger. And so start mentally preparing yourself to see some very large spreads between these teams, especially from those at the front and those at the back. So it could be very interesting to follow, sort of in almost a game on its own, but I think long gone are the days, at least as of right now, of these, field spreads where everyone is finishing within, a minute and a half of each other from the first to last at the end of a race distance. So it's going to get very interesting to follow, but I think it is definitely a case of 2026 might be a bit of a wider gap than many of us might be expecting after coming off of a 2025 season where it was very good. And if we take a look ahead at Australia, I think just sort of my biggest takeaway from this is I think Australia might be one of the more exciting moments for an exciting moment for modern Formula One. Obviously, you have big changes from last season to this season, not only in the cars themselves and these power units and these regulations surrounding it. You have the modern regulations with the batteries being a major component in power output. I think this season is also going to be very evidently a case where the driver, I think, is going to make more of an impact than maybe ever before, or at least in a very long time. Before these cars were a lot more analog. Now that they're more modern, I think this is probably the closest we're getting to sort of those analog cars. And realistically, I think the first couple seasons of this regulation era might actually help define the future of Formula One, or at least in modern Formula One. Just because if this power unit package doesn't necessarily deliver, They're really going to have to make another change coming in, I believe 2031, I think is the next one. And I think they're going to have to start having those conversations. But at the same time, I think Australia is going to be massively telling for this era of regulations. It's going to be massively telling for the pecking order and maybe even the future of Formula One. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comment section below. Let's go ahead and transition now to our week 2 winners and losers. And realistically, I think this pairing might actually be our testing overall winners and losers. Let's start with our testing week 2 winners, and it has to be Ferrari. I went on about them to the begin, our biggest takeaways, and I think it is the biggest takeaway. There are a lot of people who are going to point to it and say testing doesn't matter, testing this, testing that, testing whatever. At the end of the day, yes, it's testing. Ultimately, it doesn't mean anything until we get to Australia and we see what these cars and these teams and these drivers can put out there for real. But at the same time, when we had an entire off season talking about Mercedes this, Mercedes this, Mercedes this, Red Bull obviously also in that conversation, I think a lot of people were not necessarily writing off Ferrari. You're not going to write off, one of the top 4 teams. But at the same time, I think all the conversation was around this engine trick from Mercedes. Can Red Bull recreate it? This, that, and the other thing. At the end of the day, it wasn't until I think we got to testing where everyone kind of took a step back and went, wait a minute, Ferrari might actually have something here. Will it be enough? I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, there has to be the biggest winners from them because they've gained not only a lot of confidence, they've also seemed to have a pretty solid grasp over their package. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think that is a big, big bonus, especially if they can actually get development right. If they can get the most out of this package, especially this year, it puts them in a very good spot. I think if you're, I don't think you can swing all the way to Ferrari or to the new favorites. We really don't know what Mercedes was sandbagging or what they truly will look like. The same can be said about Ferrari. We know Ferrari love to go out there and put in a little glory run here in testing to make headlines, get a lot of people talking, get the buzz up. But at the same time, we will not know what happens until lights go out in Australia and we see what these teams have to offer in a real competitive session scenario. But after an off season where there was almost no faith in Ferrari, eyes are opening. And this 2 week of testing, I think, put them in a very, very good spot. All right, let's quickly go over our losers. And if you are counting with me and saw last week's version of our testing and takeaways, Aston Martin was our losers in week 1. They are once again our losers in week 2, which of course makes them our losers for the entirety of Bahrain preseason testing. And even if you extend that to the Barcelona shakedown, I think it is also still going to be Aston Martin, because if you follow the trajectory that they took, the Barcelona shakedown, they were a day late. They, I believe, only did 2 out of their 3 days of testing. 2, they had to have some restrictions on the power unit because Honda wasn't sure if it would be able to handle it. So they actually had a effectively power or speed cap on their engine in Barcelona shakedown. They still got their shakedown done. They got some data. All is good there. They come to week 1 of preseason testing and they end up finding themselves about 4.5 seconds off the pace over a single lap, and it did not look good. The vibes were extremely low. You now come to week 2, hoping to make some sort of ground, make some sort of corrections. You had a week of badness to dissect and try and recover from. And not only did you struggle with reliability issues, you have Honda coming out and putting out a statement talking about how they have limited parts availability, and Aston Martin would effectively have their testing cut short. You saw multiple instances of what could be attributed to driver error. It could attributed to the car error or power unit or gearbox or whatever it is. Aston Martin, I believe, if I read this correctly, did not have a stint last longer than 27 or 28 laps, which is a far cry against a full race distance. I mean, you have teams out here like Haas, like Mercedes, like Red Bull, like Ferrari that are doing these extremely long stints. We saw full race distances run by these cars on every other team except for Aston Martin, and it is going to be a long couple of weeks before we get to Australia for them. They are going back to the drawing board, I have to imagine, and it could be the start of a tough year for Aston Martin. But at the end of the day, we'll see what they put out in Australia, but they are definitely staring down a daunting challenge ahead here in 2026. All right, testing may be over, but our questions remain. I think we got a lot of answers to some of our lingering questions leading up to testing, but now we have our questions that remain for round 1 in Australia. I think the biggest question on everyone's mind is, what has Mercedes still been holding back? I think there are still a lot of questions about whether Mercedes is still holding a little something back in terms of their overall performance. They still perform very well in long runs, were very competitive over a single lap, but at the same time, preseason testing, especially when it comes to the title favorites, I think we'll always have a lingering question, and I think I, for one, am very curious to see how much performance they're able to extract going out into Australia, where they'll be turned up to 10 for potentially the first time, and we'll see if the rumors are true and see if they are truly have a gap on the rest of the field here in round 1. So that is definitely a lingering question on my mind as we head to Australia. Kind of in a similar point, is Ferrari for real, or are they just headline hunting? I mentioned it before. Ferrari love themselves a glory run, generate some buzz, get themselves in the media spin, and try to put themselves in some good light. And so, are they still holding a little bit back? Are they just turning up the wick to their 10 to, really pop some headlines and pop some numbers on a page and get some buzz generated about them? Or are they really going to be challenging for the title? I think this battle between the Mercedes sandbagging allegations and the Ferrari potentially anti-sandbagging allegations is going to be a fun one to follow. I will be tuned in to FP1 immediately, and we'll see what Australia has in store for us there. And then as a Haas fan, I would be loath to admit I'm not extremely curious in what the best of the rest battle looks like this season. I think Australia, kind of similarly at the top, is going to be very fun to follow. I would love nothing more than for Haas to turn it up even more, bring some good data from these testing, and really continue to push and develop this car going into round 1. I would love nothing more than to see Esteban and Ollie, consistently battling for points and potentially bring home a 5th in the constructors, because that would make my year for sure. And then obviously the biggest question lingering over everything is, will the 2026 regulations actually deliver? I think there's been a lot of questions, probably rightfully so, here in the Bahrain tests. And will they get themselves figured out? I'm not sure. But will the racing be good enough to make up for it? I'm also not sure. This is going to be the biggest question over, I think, the entire season when it comes to the sport as a whole. And I, for one, hope it does. I think there definitely will be some hiccups along the way. But at the end of the day, if we get a fun title challenge, if we get a fun, close battles on the grid, I think it'll be forgiven. But if it's tough to watch the entire season, it could be a long season. And from a spectator standpoint, or a more exciting spectator standpoint, because we'll never truly know what's going to happen. But I, for one, can't wait to find out. But guys, there we have it. Our week 2 Bahrain testing takeaways is complete. We officially have nothing in between here and Australia, except hopes, dreams, and a Drive to Survive season that I, for one, am actually pretty excited to watch. So I hope you enjoyed this week 2 takeaways. I would love to see and hear what you guys took away from week 2. Let me know down in the comment section below what your biggest takeaway was on this second week. It could be Ferrari good, it could be Aston Martin bad, or anywhere in between. And as always, if you made it this far into the video, I truly appreciate you. Leave a like rating because it'll really help me out. And if you haven't already, subscribe, join our small little community, and we'd love to have you join in on the conversation. We'll be back next week for another Formula 1 video, but only a few short weeks away from Australia round 1. I hope you're as excited for it as I am. But until then, guys, I'll see you in the next one.